Hi viewers, in this video I will show you how I remove the upper intake manifold and how I replace the spark plugs on my 2007 Volvo S40. To know when to replace the spark plugs in normal conditions, you can refer to the owner's manual or the aftermarket product specifications. To begin, I park the vehicle on a level surface with the transmission in the park position. The parking brake was also engaged. After, I disconnected the battery negative terminal. I used a terminal plastic cap to isolate it and reduce the risk of causing electrical problems. To replace the spark plugs with this 2.4-liter engine, the intake manifold has to be removed. First, to disconnect the vacuum system, I used a 14mm wrench to press in the red collar locking system. While I was holding the collar in place, I pulled out the vacuum pipe. Two electrical socket connectors had to be disconnected. The first one was connected on the map sensor. The cable fastener securing the electrical harness branch was easy to remove from the intake manifold. The second connector was connected on the throttle body. The connector locking tab was facing the left-hand side of the car. To be able to remove the intake manifold later, I loosened the clamp securing the air intake hose between the throttle body and the mass airflow housing. It was difficult to see, but there was also a flexible tube that had to be unplugged. It was located just under the intake manifold near the battery. The upper manifold assembly is held in place with 8 bolts. 2 of them are fastened on the rear side of the engine. I removed the 2 rear bolts first. Next, to work safely on the forward section, I began by loosening the 6 bolts, then I unbolted them. When I lifted the upper manifold, I also paid attention to safely remove the air intake hose. To properly seal the upper intake manifold with the lower intake manifold, Volvo uses air crossover sealing rings in between the 2 parts. Since I planned on cleaning the aluminum on the lower manifold mating surface, I prepared 5 foam plugs wrapped in plastic to prevent dust and debris from getting inside the lower intake manifold ports. Once done, I removed the upper timing belt cover. A T30 Torx bit was required to undo the 2 machine screws. In this view, you can see the electrical harness routing and the 5 coils located over the spark plugs. Years ago, I added dot marks on the coils to identify the position of each of them. I used an 8mm socket to loosen and undo the 5 bolts holding the coils. 2 extra 8mm bolts were also used to connect the electrical ground eyelets on the engine cylinder head cover. The socket connector at the end of the harness connected on the VVT solenoid was also disconnected. When it was done, it was easier to loosen the coils from the spark plug wells. This gave me more play to lift the locking tabs. Later, when all the coil connectors and the engine ground eyelets were disconnected, I moved the electrical harness aside. When I removed the coils, some boots were still sticking on the spark plugs. I removed them separately. I put the parts on the workbench and I disassembled the rest of the boots to wash them. I also brushed and cleaned 5 coils to visually inspect them and replaced any if necessary. There was also a lot of dirt and plastic fragments coming from the corrugated tubing all over the engine valve cover. So it was essential to vacuum all around to prevent dust and particles from getting inside the combustion chambers. After, when it was clean enough, I undid all the spark plugs. Some of them were harder to unscrew, but with a proper size ratchet wrench, I had no problem loosening them up. A bit of penetrating fluid could have been used if needed. I kept them in order to compare them with the ones I replaced 4 years ago. I usually replace my good quality spark plugs every 4 or 5 years. In this view, you can see that the Bosch spark plugs were made in Germany and the Volvo ones were made in Japan. I didn't buy the platinum or the iridium ones since the Bosch nickel yttrium spark plugs were fine for my needs. When the boots were fully dried, I reassembled them with the coils. Refer to manufacturer documentation to know if anti-seize is required. In this video, I did not apply any anti-seize on my spark plugs since the spark plug threaded holes were already a bit oily. The torque was set to 21 foot-pounds as written per Bosch specifications. A good electrical ground path to the battery negative terminal is very important for the coils and the spark plugs. So, I cleaned the bonding strap contact surface on the engine to improve the electrical path between the engine and the chassis ground. Soon after, the coils were ready to be installed. To properly refit the ignition coils assemblies in the spark plug wells, I centered the boots with the spark plugs, then I aligned the brackets with the threaded holes. I fastened the retaining bolts and I snug tightened them to make sure they would not get loose during engine running conditions. Soon after, I routed the electrical harness and I reconnected all the plugs. The two eyelets were also snug tightened. To avoid damaging the electrical wires, I double-checked and corrected the harness routing. Once back on the workbench, I removed the sealing rings from the upper intake manifold to clean the parts. Since I had newer sealing rings, I installed them. It is important to clean the surface with a scraper and make sure the sealing rings are seating and sealing properly. I made sure to vacuum the contact surfaces just before refitting the intake manifold. I slowly maneuvered the upper intake manifold to partially insert the air intake hose. The bolts were also well aligned to be fastened. The torque was set to 10 Newton meters. The same torque was also applied for the two rear bolts. The air intake hose was difficult to refit, but after a minute, I was able to secure it in place. Next, I replugged the vacuum hose located under the intake manifold near the battery. The throttle body connector was easy to reconnect. The vacuum plastic pipe was inserted and locked in place. The upper timing belt cover was positioned to be fastened. I used my telescopic magnet tool to get the two machine screws started. Then I used a T30 torque socket bit to snug tighten them. The timing belt side cover and the timing belt upper cover were also clipped together behind the cylinder head. The oil filter cap was also refitted. The battery was reconnected and the vehicle was ready for the road test. Most of the time, I find it easier to remove the spark plugs when the engine is warmed up, but then I wear gloves to avoid getting burned.